surveillance and attempting to trying to locate him. As I mentioned, this incident started at about 11:30 and lasted till about 7:30 p.m. So, for example, they learned that Mr. Alvarenga was employed as a corrections officer at the prison and possibly had a ballistics vest, was serving at the Utah National Guard, and had previously applied to be a police officer but was not selected, and the officer had responded to a report of him being suicidal a week prior. Several hours later, at about 5:10 p.m., FN's husband again called 911 and reported that Mr. Alvarenga had just flashed a handgun, pulled up next to FN, who was in a separate vehicle, and was continuing to have a gun in his hand. West Jordan PD detectives located Mr. Alvarenga's vehicle and began loosely following him and called in a Utah Department of Public Safety Star 9 helicopter to conduct overhead surveillance of Mr. Alvarenga's vehicle. Star 9 flew overhead and called out Mr. Alvarenga's movement as Mr. Alvarenga drove to Springville and then back to South Jordan. West Jordan PD detectives loosely followed Mr. Alvarenga's in unmarked police vehicles. During that time, West Jordan PD detectives established contact with Mr. Alvarenga over the phone and attempted to negotiate with him for over an hour. About 2 hours later, at approximately 7:08 p.m., Mr. Alvarenga stopped at a Costco fuel station in South Jordan to fill up. As he left, a West Jordan PD detective successfully deployed a spike strip on Mr. Alvarenga's vehicle, and Mr. Alvarenga took off. As Mr. Alvarenga fled, Star 9 continued to call out his movements, and the officers loosely followed without lights or siren. As Mr. Alvarenga was headed eastbound on 114 South, several marked police vehicles approached from the opposite direction with lights and sirens, and then took over the front of that pursuit. It is an extended, long period, several hours of Star 9 video. We'll show some aspects of it, but it suffices to say that the strip worked, and he blew out his car's eventually tires, and you can see that he will eventually lose control. About 6.5 minutes after being spiked, Mr. Alvarenga approached Redwood Road, and traveling eastbound on 114 South, traffic was stopped for a red light. Mr. Alvarenga came to a stop, quickly got out of his vehicle, and ran northbound across the street and to the east side of a Jordan Credit Union building. As he exited the vehicle, officers observed a black handgun in his right hand, and West Jordan PD K-9 officer Longmore called out, quote, "He's got a gun, he's got the gun in his hand," end quote. Several officers and Officer Longmore's K-9 named Maya pursued Alvarenga on foot around the east side of the building and into the building's north parking lot. As they ran, South Jordan PD Officer Henderson called out, "Gun in right hand, gun in right hand, gun in right hand," and Officer Longmore commanded K-9 Maya to hit, that is, to engage the suspect. As Mr. Alvarenga ran northwest across the parking lot and underneath a covered parking structure, K-9 Maya caught up to Mr. Alvarenga and attached briefly. At the same time, Mr. Alvarenga turned and fired one round from his handgun, hitting and fatally injuring K-9 Maya. 3 officers who were pursuing on foot at that moment, West Jordan Officer Longmore, South Jordan PD Officer Henderson, South Jordan PD Officer Rossi, returned fire as Mr. Alvarenga briefly continued running across the parking lot. Mr. Alvarenga then fell to the ground, face down on his stomach. Officers called out shots fired, and the K-9 was hit over, and that the K-9 was hit over the radio. Officers immediately began yelling commands to Mr. Alvarenga to show his hand as a team of officers equipped with rifles, handguns, and a shield tactically positioned themselves behind a police truck to the southwest of Mr. Alvarenga's position on the west side of the parking lot. Star 9, which is the helicopter, continued to monitor Mr. Alvarenga from overhead as the officers' commands continued. After more than a minute, Mr. Alvarenga began moving, still lying face down on the ground, and star 9, which was calling out the information, called out that he was still moving. After more than 4 minutes on the ground, Mr. Alvarenga retrieved his handgun from underneath him with his right hand. Star 9 called out that the gun was in his right hand and that they saw him pull it out. Mr. Alvarenga then began manipulating the weapon. As he did so, Star 9 advised that the gun is still in his right hand and that he was manipulating it. After about 6 minutes on the ground, despite numerous commands, Mr. Alvarenga turned his head to look in the direction of the officers as he lifted up his left forearm, and moved his right arm, holding the handgun in the direction of the officers. 5 officers, West Jordan PD Officer Sergeant Webster, West Jordan PD Officer Detective Ryer, West Jordan PD Detective Curtis, UPD Detective Pender, and UPD Detective Valdez fired their weapons at Mr. Alvarenga from their positions at the truck. Officers called out for more shots were fired, continuing to give commands. After observing no movement for a couple of minutes, officers moved the truck closer to Mr. Alvarenga, used a K9 to make contact, and then approached Mr. Alvarenga, who was obviously deceased. Based on the physical evidence in this case, including the weapons download, it is likely that Officer Longmore, Henderson, and Rossi, in the first encounter, fired approximately 29 millimeter rounds during the first volley of fire, and that during the second volley of fire, Detectives Curtis, Pender collectively fired 5 9mm rounds from their handgun, and Sergeant Webster, Detective Ryer, Detective Valdez collectively fired up to 26 rifle rounds. In addition, it is likely that Mr. Alvarenga fired 1 millimeter round, the round that hit and killed the dog, service dog K9 Maya. So we had a lot of stuff to go through. As I mentioned, this was almost a 6 to 8 hour long from beginning to end as we sifted through. So we're going to show you several things here today. The first thing is this was the route of pursuit. It started here, and it ended up going here. Went from here down here all the way down to Springwell, where he got off the exit, turned around, and then came back. And as we mentioned, although there were multiple attempts made to sort of have him pull over, which he all fled from, this was the longest thing. It was approximately, I think, 80 miles round trip that they ended up following him, and they followed him loosely. And what he did is from here he came back up to the Costco, and then from there ended up right here. This also is that subsection of that Costco that I mentioned to you earlier. He's at the Costco, and he will then go down after his car has been spiked. He goes down from there, and he continues to go as the car starts to deflate, and you can actually see that on the Star 9, and he will eventually come to a stop here before he jumps out on foot and leaves at that time. The other thing here, so this here is the, the Star 9 footage is a couple of hours long. So what we did is, as we went through it, this is really the Star 9 at the Costco. This is the suspect right here who will then move his vehicle after the spike that occurs. Go ahead. He's filling the car up. They've had him under observation all that time. That's him again right there. He will get in his car at this point. And now they're going to try to do the spike at
back in the driver's seat.
this is the stripe, right? He notices that they're there. He starts to think about backing up. The officer's right here, but there's nowhere to go for him. He tries to go through there. They pull this thing, and he's spiked. And at that point, there is that pursuit that goes, and the Star 9 continues to follow through on the footage as they come through. And what is, it's a long thing. I didn't want to need to necessarily run, but what is important is what they will notice is that the tires start to heat up as he blows out the tires because this is a heat sensor. And he continues to go. There is pursuit that is given. They're giving him loose pursuit there. And as he starts to blow out the tires, he comes towards the second part that I'll show here. You can see this is a marker. This is the heat marker on the vehicle that shows you how hot that's gotten from the tires that have been spiked. And he's blown that out. So go ahead and play this, please.
Coming up to a red light, red ball at Redwood.
He jumps out.
Out on foot. Star 9 has the eye. Come around, come around.
Officers give foot chase. He runs. The dog gives pursuit, and he shoots the dog right here. Officers respond, and that's where he goes down. So the next thing that we looked at was another video. This was from the credit union, and this is at normal speed. That gave us a different vantage point. This is him having exited, running through the parking lot. Go ahead. Right there is running, and you can see if you slow down that he's got the gun in his hand. The officers are here. There's K9 Maya, which is being directed. The 3 shooting officers are here as they give pursuit, and he's going to turn around from go there. So go ahead and play that. Now what this does is another angle on this that shows, again, he'll be running across from here. And as you look, you can see the dark object in his hand is right there, the gun, right there. So both from the interviews from non-shooting officers, the shooting officers, as is their constitutional right to not give us an interview, but both from the video evidence that we had and the other witness officers, it was both from the inception of the case that he was known to have a handgun that he had flashed, and then of course when he exits, he makes the conscious decision to grab the gun as he runs out from there as well. This next one, again, is the thing that you'll notice, again, this is the under awning. So the Star 9 didn't show it to us, but we had this camera angle, which can also actually show us the contact with the dog, as the dog is commanded to hit the suspect. Go ahead. That's him running. There's the K9. And at that point, he shoots the dog, and the dog is here. They're returning fire at this point. And then Mr. Valeranga is going to fall right down there. So we took the same video again, and we kind of lightened it up a little bit. And there were 2 different angles of this. So you'll notice there's a split screen that happened here. So this captures the long version of it, and this will capture a more enhanced version of it as well. So then we ran through the analysis again through that as well. Suspect right here. He's got the gun in his hand. There's the K9. He sees it. As the K9 attaches, he shoots the dog right there. And the dog has been shot. And he shot the dog in the back, and the bullet came out the abdomen. So at this point, we'll show. So there were there were the shooting officers, Longmore, Henderson, Ross, and then the witness officer at that initial shot were the three engaged officers. And this was what we were able to recover from their body cam. Again, we tried to condense it as much as we could to get onto the focus part. So you will see this. Longmore has been part of the pursuit that comes to that. And at that point, it's exiting out, and then the action goes from there. There's the suspect running. They're going to round. There's the gunshot. You can see him right there. And that was with Longmore's vantage on that. Simultaneously, again, the same thing was slowed down. So go ahead and run that, please. Again, as they round the corner, there's the sound of the gunshot again. They hear. And you can see the muzzle flash. And he is at that point there. I've got officers are fanning out, and the other officers are starting to stage over here at this time, and the dogs are retrieved here. This is the other officer was Officer Henderson. Go ahead and play that, please. Shot the dog. And that gave us also that other advantage. And then, of course, we had Officer Rossi, who was the third shooting officer. She's giving pursuit with the other three other officers. Gunshot. Return fire. She goes on gun. He's on the ground, moving, so is here. The other side of the officers are responding, so now they will fan to take cover because there's no cover here. They still know that he's got a gun. They don't know where the gun is. They're giving commands, but they're moving because this truck comes up and they're going to take cover at this point right there. And the last in that initial volley was Officer Weeks. He did not fire, but he gives us also that fanning thing. Go ahead and run his. Gunshot, return fire, and he fans to the right. And then it gave us also positional information as we went through our analysis. This other thing that we wanted to show you, so it's important to put that in context. Again, Star 9 continued to have voluminous amount of material. It was heat sensitive. So what has happened is that first round of shooting has already happened here. The suspect has gone. He goes down here, and as I mentioned, as the initial shooting officers go there, there's staging that is occurring. This truck is where they had fanned off to. They start to move and they start to station there. So what is happening, to put it in context, Star 9 is continuing to communicate. They know that he has the gun. They don't know where the gun is or what his state is at this time, so they have to take cover, but they're also moving on to rifle, and they're taking cover. So go ahead and play this out. So he's starting to move. He deliberately is going to reach. So remember, this is empty right now. His hand is empty. And there he goes. He pulls out the gun. And they think that he's trying to shoot himself, or they can't tell. He's got the gun close to his face, but they're communicating now. He's got the gun in his hand, and these officers are aware that he's got the gun.
We saw him pull the gun out. It's in his right hand.
And this elbow is interesting and important because he's going to use it to leverage as he stands up, and he turns and looks at them, and the gun goes underneath. And one of the officers said in the interview, who was the non-shooting, that they were concerned that he was going to turn and fire this way. And you'll see him prop himself up. Granted, this is the helicopter looking down. They've been telling him, show us your hands, move your hands out, and he's ignoring those commands as he pulls the gun out from underneath his belt. I must warn you, this is graphic at this point. And you'll see one last effort when he tries to, right there, as he starts to raise up. And that's... And that second shots that were fired. Now, what was important for us as we went through was several factors from an analytical in the second series of shots. He's been given commands not to show his hand. He clearly has been hit, but he has movement, and he takes his energy to pull the gun out. The second thing that he does is he's manipulating for advantage. And the interviews of the non-shooting officers who said that they can see him, that when he makes that last effort, their concern was that as he pushes himself up, he had done this. He's looking back, and that hand is coming this way, and that they were concerned that he was going to fire as he was trying to roll over. And that is at the moment that, at least from the non-shooting officers, when the shots rang out. Since we didn't have the statements from any of the officers, we had to sort of infer to see what was the context in which that second round of volleys that occurs. Given with the traffic that was being communicated from the Star 9 and from the non-shooting officers, it is our conclusion that they continue to believe that he continued to be a threat consistent with him retrieving the weapon and then pointing in there. And then as the last part was, he was found with the gun again, consistent with that. And the argument that they were, or the position they were saying is that as he tries to push up with this hand, that they see, one of the officers says, I see daylight, and this gun is closing in through that daylight. So based on the totality of our evidence that we reviewed, we noticed that there was one incident with two shooting scenarios, that in the first shooting scenario, Officer Longmore, Henderson, Rossi, that we believe would be likely entitled to an affirmative defense of justification, and it is not unreasonable that they believe that their life was in danger. And then in the second shooting scenario with Sergeant Webster, Ryer, Detective Curtis, Detective Pender, and Detective Valdez, that it is in the totality of all the circumstances and the information that was being communicated to them, that it was not unreasonable, and certainly we could not prove that it was unreasonable, beyond a reasonable doubt, that they were in fear for their lives given in the totality of the circumstances. So we we declined to file charges against both set of the officers, and believe that they would be entitled to the affirmative defense as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Anyone? Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
How many rounds were used?
Sure.
Can you just confirm
Yeah,
that?
absolutely, absolutely. There were collectively the initial, so again, 2 volleys. The first volleys collectively, we believe approximately 20 shots were fired by the 3 officers. As you hear the gunshot through the dog and their return fire is what we estimate. And then in the second round of the volley, there were both a combination of handgun and rifle. There were 3 officers who were on rifle and 2 officers who were on handgun. We believe collectively between the 2 officers with the handgun, they fired 5 rounds. And collectively, the 3 officers with the long rifles collectively fired 26 rounds. And as I mentioned, if I didn't, let me just, and of course, the dog who was shot was rushed off to surgery, and she succumbed to her wounds and died as well.
And that was the only shot that...
That is the shot. And for us, it was, again, when we looked at it, it was the totality of the information. This was a long, drawn-out process. He had threatened at least 2 civilians with the handgun, ostensibly. And he had failed to stop on 3 occasions. And when he jumped out with the handgun in his hand, which was a broadcast. And as they're giving foot pursuit, they hear the handgun. The shot is clearly heard at that time. They don't know whether he's shooting at them or shooting the dog. So they're returning fire in response to that. And as they get up there and they return fire, so he takes about 10, 15 steps before he collapses. They know that he is in possession of the gun. They move to a secure location, and they're trying to figure out, okay, he's still moving, where's the gun? And they can't see it. Remember, it's dark, and so they've now positioned themselves to the west side. So they're getting that information first foremost from the Star 9 helicopter. And then several of the officers do see him as they get acclimated to the light and everything. They can see him moving and manipulating, and they can see him grabbing the gun, and they're hearing that he's grabbing the gun as well. And one officer, there were a couple of officers that were non-shooting officers, that was critical to us, that talk about that one officer who had the shield, he was trying to protect the other officers who were on long rifle. So he was looking through the shield and looking at the suspect. He says that he sees the elbow go up, and there's light that he can see through there, and then the light gets blocked, and he's afraid that the gun is being presented. And the other officer says that they see him, they think he's going to roll over after they've been told that he has now recaptured the gun. It's in his right hand, and he's moving towards that direction. And then the second volley of shots occur simultaneous with that as well.
Were you able to confirm that through body cam footage? Because we saw it from the helicopter, but not on the ground when that second volley happened.
Right, and so we did not have any body cam footage of the shooting from that angle. We had it from the officers who gave chase, and the most pivotal information that we had was from the Star 9. Because from the initial, when he pulls the gun out, his body's actually facing away from the officers who are positioned to his left over there. He's kind of canted towards them, so it's kind of this way. But it is when he they don't know what he's doing, where the gun is. It's hindsight for us. What we conclude is that he falls down and the gun is right there on his chest or by his belly. And he knows it's there. So because we see from the right side, from Star 9, that he does not at one time have the gun in his right hand as Star 9 goes around. Then we see him go to his belly and he pulls the gun out with his right hand. And then he's sort of manipulating it, and now they're announcing that it's there. He's manipulating it, and then that last gesture where he tries to lift himself up, he's doing this, and that's when when the second volley of shots are fired.
How nice is it to have the helicopter? This is one of the first ones I've seen with the helicopter.
It's actually probably the third or fourth one that we've had with the helicopter over the years that I've looked at it. I'm glad. Look, for us, as I said, whenever there's a shooting that occurs, I think it's incumbent upon us to be as transparent with our community as we can. Whatever the context in the loss of life is, I think it's important to be as transparent because we want to know what happened. As is the constitutional right of our officers, they can or not give us their statement, but that does not absolve us of our responsibility to try to describe what happened to the best of our ability. And if that helicopter, to your question, helps us fill in those gaps, to give context to, so we can say what was going through the officer's mind and what proof would be there were we to engage in that prosecution. And that's always with an eye towards just trying to complete the factual scenario to the best of our ability that we can. And that helicopter video, and as I've said many times before, all body cam video in this day and age is critical to us. Body cam does not always capture what an officer sees, but it does help us flesh out and put the context to what is going on. So we were very grateful to have that. And remember, this was multiple hours of stuff, so we had to go through multiple call logs, data points, and different things to try to condense it down to this moment that we showed in a very short period of time. The first call for service really came out at 11:30, and we conclude basically at 7:30 at night. So this is a long, drawn-out process with this individual. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Hey, Keith, so that video we sent out,
To be able to get that, you have to, let me see, West Valley was the investigation.
So far, so good.
The show?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good, man. Getting fair. So in TikTok, we have already 20,000 views.
Really?
Getting fair.
Cool.
How's everything with you?
It's fun, man.
Kids